Thank you. What I want to do is spend about an hour looking at resilience, which I think is one of the kind of fundamental bits of leadership. And I kind of see resilience is actually something that maintains us and we need to do. What the public want us to do is to be great doctors, really, and they want us to be professional, and they want us to be compassionate. And I guess for me, it's leadership and resilience is part of that that's going to kind of enable us to do that. And what I'm going to talk about is probably, to be honest, I'm not going to tell you anything that you don't already know, and so you could leave now, although we haven't done to the Christmas trees, really. It's probably all the things that your grandma would tell you, really. But what I'm hoping to do is give you a bit of the evidence around it. So what I want you to do, just to think, just to start with, is just kind of think about your own resilience. And I want you to just think if you were to kind of grade your resilience out of 10. So if 10 is your kind of perfect level of resilience, and how would you rate your resilience out of 10? And what I'd like you to do is just maybe with the person next to you, is just say to the person next to you how you rate yourself out of 10 and why that is. So just spend just a minute or two doing that. And we're going to come back to that in a minute, really. So if I was going to say to you, how many would rate, just put your hand, how many would rate your resilience at 10? 10 out of 10, fantastic. 9? Any 9s? 8s? 7s? 6? 5? 4? 3? 2? 1. So quite a lot kind of in the middle, really, and I think for a lot of us that's kind of where we are. And resilience is a very moving target, and I'm going to sort of talk a bit about why that happens. I mean, one of the things I think about medicine is it is a hard job and bad things happen. I mean, I wouldn't do anything else. I absolutely love it, and it's actually the challenge of it that makes it so exciting. But difficult things do happen, and I guess I put that in the background of the garden, because I think I wouldn't choose to do something that was easy, but I guess it's thinking how we look after ourselves and when things get difficult. And in terms of what the definition of resilience is, I mean, people talk about it being the kind of ability to bounce back and kind of cope with things. And I mean, it's kind of a little bit kind of cartoonish, well, there's so much going on for us. But looking at when they looked at resilience, a lot of the original work on resilience was done in paediatrics, actually. And Professor Malcolm Rutter was one of the people who did a lot of work looking at orphans in Romania and looking why actually some people who had children who had very difficult backgrounds actually coped well. And he talked about it as a sort of reduced vulnerability. And what I'm going to talk about is some of the background to why that's happened. So the kind of the ability to succeed despite adversity, really. And actually seeing what we can learn from that. And one of the things about resilience and adversity is actually the amount of research that's gone on about it. And I'm going to talk a bit about that research. But a lot of research going on in the army around post-traumatic stress, around the interaction of risk and resilience. And what's really interesting is the outcomes are not always quite what's expected, and that both nature and nurture are involved in it. So what I want you to do now is think of someone you know who's resilient. I mean, you can think of somebody on a world stage. It's actually quite interesting to think of somebody who you work with, or you've come across, or somebody that you've seen working in a working environment. And I want you to actually think of what that person is and what qualities they have that makes them resilient. And what I'd like you to do is just have a bit of a discussion around your tables about who it is that you can think of that's resilient. And I'd like somebody from each of the tables just to make a list of what are the features of those people that make them resilient. So just spend a few minutes doing that for me, if you would. No? Okay. So, I mean, if you actually look at the research about what makes people resilient, I mean, you actually, as I said, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. We know that there's a lot about positivity. And there's quite a lot of interesting work about positivity that I'm going to talk about sort of genetic influences. Something around confidence, something about being strengthened by traumatic events. I mean, actually, I was interested in the sort of water off a duck's back thing, but actually what you learn by going through difficult things. And that's what they've shown with children, that actually going through something difficult, but having somebody to support you, enables you actually to become more resilient. And that concept of making adversity meaningful, I mean, difficult things will happen. I mean, any job that we do at the kind of level we're working at, really, really hard things happen. And for me, the way I cope with some really difficult things have happened is actually to say, this has happened, I didn't want it to happen, but I am going to make a difference because this has happened. And actually that kind of making it meaningful, you know, it can be something that really helps you. I mean, I think it's said about perseverance and persistence and planning. Something around composure under stress, and I put in brackets low anxiety, because one of the things that actually you have to sometimes appear composed when you're under stress, although you might not feel it actually. It doesn't mean that you're not necessarily anxious, and people can't always recognise your anxiety, but actually being able to be composed and overcoming risk and challenge. So kind of the things that you know. And one of the things that there's such strong evidence for is actually that you can learn to be more resilient. And I think sometimes when things are easy, we kind of cope quite well, and it's when difficult things happen. So what I'm going to go through is some of the research around that. And from a neuroscience point of view, there's been a huge amount of research going on around how our brain works, and there's kind of MRI scanners going on around the world really, and looking at how our brains work under stress. And looking at brain plasticity and how brains can change and brain training. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the London taxi drivers. Do you know about London taxi drivers' brains? Has everybody heard about that? Which is that London taxi drivers have to take a test. It's called the test, isn't it? Yeah, and the knowledge, that's the knowledge they do. And what they obviously have to know the knowledge of the streets. And what they showed is that London taxi drivers have a huge area where their brains develop, where they learn that information. It's within the hippocampus that they get that area of knowledge. And that if you scan their brains before they learn it, actually that bit of brain isn't there. So a huge ability for the brain to develop. The ability to kind of use stress and actually the effect that stress has on your brain, and the kind of how we work. I mean, they talk about you need a village to raise a child, but really, if you think evolutionary, we were kind of made to come up to kind of work within groups of people, and actually that link with other people is incredibly important, and kind of using that would be helpful. So understanding how you work and understanding how your brain works. And have any of you come across, I'm sure some of you have, the chimp management work, Steve Peters' work on chimp management, and actually understanding how the amygdala works, so that there's the frontal cortex, which is very logical, and we do things, which is logical, and we can think them through, and we know that's a sensible thing. But the amygdala, which is the bit of your brain which is there to, you know, fright and flight and release adrenaline and stress you out, but saves you when things go wrong. Steve Peters talks about being a chimp. People talk about amygdala hijack or chimp hijack, that bit of your brain can really stress you out. But understanding how those two bits of your brain are working and when you go in between one and the other can be incredibly useful and incredibly helpful. So a lot of kind of background around the neuroscience on how it works. So that's your chimp fella. This, I don't know if any of you did this in advance. I know we sent it out with information, which is a test your own resilience. Did anybody have a go at that? Anybody have a go at it? Which is the Nicholas and McBride, who are a research unit looking at resilience, and they, you can do this online free questionnaire, and it comes out dividing resilience into 5 areas. And I really like this because I think it comes up with a bit like we're coming up with on your tables, that resilience is not one single thing, and the chances are you might be better at some bits than you are at others. So understanding that can help you see where to develop, and also make you realise that you might be, you can't be good at everything really. But the optimism stuff, the glass half full, is a really important part of resilience. And what a lot of the work, there's been a lot of work gone on as to whether resilience is genetic and genetically inherited, and there is considered to be a genetic component of optimism. It's probably not as strong as they first thought it was. And one of the really interesting things at the moment that's being looked into is the epigenetics. I don't know if you're familiar. So obviously genetics are like your genes, which are kind of, you could view as kind of dusty books on a shelf. But it's actually whether that gene is activated. And actually that's a lot to do with the nurture and things that go on around you, and develops into kind of epigenetics, which is what makes genetics work. So there is a genetic component to optimism, and I guess if you were going to have anything, it's probably a really important thing to have. But you can actually learn to be more optimistic. And in a way, you don't want to be too optimistic, because if you had been too optimistic, your ancestors probably would have been ate by bears, because you go, oh, it was a nice cuddly creature picture there really. So actually you need a little bit of pessimism as well, and it kind of comes to why it's good to work together on things. The solution orientation, that you can see things coming, and those of you who are the ENs, and the INs really, but the Ns is very much often about looking forward. People with a preference for intuition and N are very much seeing what's coming their way really, and that's actually really helpful. And that's one of my, I mean for me, I'm a massive solution orientation, because I play films in my head of what might happen in the future. So when something happens, I've normally kind of played the film and worked out what might happen, and that's kind of an area of you know, an area of strength. Individual accountability, that we appreciate what we do, and sometimes, I mean, we spend so long training for what we do, and then sometimes you can forget how amazing it is to be a doctor, really, because we can sometimes get lost in the midst of other things, really. So just being aware of that, being able to be flexible, and managing stress and anxiety. And one of the things I really like about this model is it says if you're under stress, sometimes you can solve that stress, you can resolve what's going on. But you know, for us sometimes that's not feasible, and actually distraction is really important. And I guess that's going to come on to some of the themes that we talk about. This is some work you may, I'm sure you're probably familiar with, is a sort of transition curve. You know, we use it in terms of somebody going through grief and loss, or accepting a terminal illness or whatever, that people go through initially, that they're in denial, and then they may start to realise what's happening, and then they start to feel down, and then they start to come up the curve the other way. And actually often the growth, we were talking about growth through adversity, that you grow through it. And actually one of the things that's really interesting to think about is that this happens for good things as well as bad things. So I don't know what, you know, if this resonates with you, but you know, it's kind of like when you qualify, it's really exciting, and you go into a job and you're on a high, and then it kind of hits you that actually it's really hard. So even, you know, good things and bad things, that actually things go up and down quite a lot. Being aware of that is important. And actually we need the support to actually grow through adversity, and I think that's something about us kind of working and supporting each other really. So this is some work by Dennis Charney, who's a biological psychiatrist, he's called actually. He works in New York, and he's done a lot of the research behind resilience. And on your tables there's a sheet, the green sheet is his work, and this is a kind of just a short version of it, which is his prescription for resilience. And he does 10 things that he says will improve your resilience. And if you look on the sheet I've given you, and if you go on the website and you can hear him speak, he talks about what the biological background is to those things, and what they've shown is the chemical changes that make those things happen. So again, similar things: optimism, flexibility, altruism. One of the things that we know is that actually doing things for other people is likely to make you feel better more than anything else, which kind of puts us in a really strong position really, if as long as we remember we do that. And the kind of role modelling theme he has is really important, and support network. One of the huge things is exercise, and exercise is an immensely important part of resilience. There's a kind of lot of work going on about how it builds new brain cells in the hippocampus, and that, you know, professors in these areas are seen running on a regular basis to improve. And we know, you know, from a patient perspective and a health perspective it's important, but it does kind of make a difference. So what I want you to do now is I'm just going to ask you all to stand up for me. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, I mean, I know obviously sometimes if you're working nights you don't get enough sleep, but say you're not working nights and say it's okay. What I'd like you to do is sit down if you don't get a good night's sleep every night, if you don't allow yourself at least 7 hours in bed every night. Blimey, okay. Okay, so sleep is one of the really, really hugely important things. And sit down if you smoke. Good, you can see that. Sit down if you drink more than the recommended units of alcohol. And sit down if you don't do exercise 2 or 3 times a week. Okay, thank you, well done. I don't know what your resilience scores were, but I hope they were high. Those of you left standing at that point, maybe. Because those are kind of some of the key things to say, and this is kind of part of what this research is about, that it does make a huge difference. And a lot of the work that Dennis Chan has done is with the army and with veterans in seeing actually what helps people cope. And I'm going to talk about some other work around that, really. So I guess for ourselves in terms of developing our resilience, and if you're working with, if you're taking on a senior role and working with trainees or working with teams and staff about what helps people to develop resilience, it's about actually looking at difficult areas of what we do. It's about a kind of graded exposure, and when you start doing a specialty, it's hard to do the difficult things, but then you recognise actually you're starting to deal with things that probably initially you found really difficult. And understanding really why, some things are difficult. And one of the works that I've been really influenced by is about understanding how we think, what's called our sort of metacognition. And there's some work by a guy called Daniel Kahneman, who's a psychologist, is a kind of Nobel-winning psychologist. And the work that I really like of his is a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, and it's about how we think. And what he says is that there's two ways of thinking. One is type 1 thinking, which is really easy. You can come up with the answer, stuff that we don't have to think too hard about. And within your own area of work, there's probably stuff that you can do without having to think about it too hard. And then the other type of thinking is type 2 thinking, and that's when you've really got to tussle with a problem. Somebody comes in, you just don't really know what to do. You're trying to work out what's going on. It's really hard, and you can tell whether people are doing type 1 or type 2 thinking because their pupils kind of flutter. And so if you kind of video them and enlarge it, you can tell whether they're thinking type 1 and type 2. And one of the things I really found really helpful about this was understanding that type 2 thinking needs more sugar. So actually, when you do need some chocolate, because it's a hard decision, you do actually need some chocolate. He did a piece of research with judges when they were trying to decide whether prisoners should go on parole. So judges were sitting down with their prisoner notes, deciding if they needed to go on parole. The wisdom is usually, isn't it, that after food people are sleepy. But actually that's not true. Actually, when you've had something to eat, your brain potentially is more creative and is more prepared to make difficult decisions. And the judges were much more likely to grant a parole decision when somebody had recently eaten. And I think, when you're doing difficult work, say it's sort of in my work, at the end of a long day, you'll be sitting trying to do some difficult results or come up with something difficult. Actually, it's worth thinking, is that the right time for me to be doing that? And I've learned that for me it's not, actually, and I go home and I have something to eat, and then actually I quite enjoy getting out and thinking about it. At 10 o'clock I have remote access and I do a lot of work like that. So it's kind of worth thinking about where your brain's doing and what it's thinking at different times, because we work at different speeds, and if you have to write something or do something difficult, actually organising your time to do that. So that's been a really helpful thing. This is a guy called Sven Hansen, who trained as a doctor. He works in New Zealand, and he runs a resilience organisation, and he does a lot of resilience training. And there's some really lovely YouTubes of him. I'm going to give you the links to, and I think are on the handouts of him talking. But his concept, which I really like, is this concept of a resilience spiral. There's somebody else would describe it as a kind of resilience wobble board. That some days or some weeks you can feel fine, you can feel resilient, and then other days you don't, and everything's really hard. So this kind of idea that we kind of spiral up and down, depending on how we're feeling, I think is for me was really helpful. And he talks about when you get into the sort of downward spiral of resilience, that you start to feel a bit disengaged with what's going on, a bit withdrawn, you don't kind of connect with other people, that you start to feel vulnerable and kind of distressed, really, which is kind of in opposition to when you're kind of feeling, yes, I can do it, and you're energised, and you're engaged, and you're kind of with it, really. And do any of you recognise that kind of feeling that sometimes you're kind of up, and then, so that sort of concept of that sort of spiral up and down is really helpful. And actually there's a YouTube of him talking for about an hour teaching resilience to some IT managers, which is really good. And he talks about what to do. And the first thing is to recognise that you're going down the spiral. And what happens when we all get stressed and you go down the spiral is actually we don't exercise, you don't eat healthily, you do all the bad things, and then you kind of go down even more. And actually, I was doing some work on this at a time when I was kind of under a lot of stress because my husband was quite unwell. And I realised actually, you've really got to make yourself do the right things, really. But if you actually start to go down that spiral, he said, prioritise what you do. Decide what's the most important thing. There's quite a lot of work recently about to-do lists. So how many of you are keen on to-do lists? You're on to-do lists, yeah. One of the things about to-do lists is that we all have these huge long to-do lists, and actually that can be quite demoralising in itself. And there's some somebody did a piece of work asking people who were very effective how they manage their to-do list. And what came out of it is that you should never have more than 5 things on your to-do list. Now that doesn't mean to say that you can't have a kind of background list to make certain you don't forget things. But you can't really do more than 5 things or think of 5 things. So you have a current to-do list with 5 things on it, and you're not allowed to put anything else on it until you've taken something off it. And I've tried that, because when you have a bigger list, sometimes it just feels so overwhelming, you don't even want to start really. So prioritise what you're going to do. The exercise we talked about before, the evidence for exercise is just incredibly powerful, that exercise makes a huge difference. And he's very keen on stretching and yoga. I'm a huge yoga fan really, and I recognise that I've been doing it for many years, and I recognise in starting it had an effect on me much greater than just actually doing it for an hour or two at the time. But it's whatever exercise works for you, diet, eating well, being outdoors, fresh air, corny things, they make a huge difference. The connection with other people. There's some work by Barbara Friedrichsen talking about how we connect. And don't you know that thing when if you feel a bit kind of, your resilience is down, you almost don't connect with other people. It's almost like you don't quite want to connect because you're feeling a bit down. So that kind of having somebody that you connect with and talk to can make a difference. Sleep, he's very keen on sleep, and there's some, again, the YouTubers have been talking about getting enough sleep and not looking at your computer before you go to bed, which I have to say I am guilty of, but it doesn't seem to keep you awake. But actually making certain that you do allow yourself enough sleep. Mindfulness, again, a lot of work on mindfulness, and Barbara Friedrichsen's work on positivity, huge impact. She's a psychologist studying the effect that mindfulness is effective, and getting help is important. So, again, nothing you don't already know, but it's actually making certain that you do those things regularly, and actually if you are feeling that you're struggling a bit. I'm going to move on from that, but if you want to read more about his work, there's a lot on the on YouTube and on the internet. And I really, really like the work of Martin Seligman. He's another psychologist working in America, and he's kind of ahead of the sort of, I suppose he was the sort of first person in the positive psychology movement. And I heard him speaking on the radio, and he's lovely because he's not kind of like a massive, happy-clappy guy at all, really. He suffered quite a lot with depression, and he did a lot of the initial work into CBT, a lot of the research around CBT, and his first book was called Learned Optimism, which is a fantastic book about optimism and how to learn to be more optimistic. But his more recent book, Flourish, I think is really, really interesting. Again, another book's on audiobook, and again you can watch him. There's a lot of YouTubes of him talking. He's done a lot of stuff about resilience in children as well. The things I kind of really like about his work, and it's some work, he reports some work that Barbara Friedrichsen I was talking about before did with a guy called Marcel Lasardo, called the Lasardo ratio. Have any of you heard of the Lasardo ratio? So the Lasardo ratio was a piece of research they did going into organisations in America and saying, sitting in on meetings, in offices, in board discussions, and actually seeing how much of the discussion was positive. So it wasn't just about giving feedback, it was just kind of like, when you get in the morning and you have a chat about stuff, does everybody come in and have a moan, or do people say, what did you do at the weekend, or that's a nice shirt, or, we're going to have a busy day today, but if we all work well, it'll be good. Or, oh my God, what's it going to be like today? It's all going to be miserable. So that kind of ratio of just positive to negative chat. And they worked out a ratio. Marcel Lasardo is a statistician, and he worked out a ratio of actually what you have to be a healthy organisation. What would you reckon? Hazard a guess. 2 to 1? Somebody else 2 to 1? Somebody else you say? 7 to 3? In fact, the ratio is 3 to 1. It's actually 2.9 to 1, and there's a bit of a row about the statistics behind it. But fundamentally, that is the ratio. So within your environment that you work in, how much would you say is kind of positive and negative? Would you say it's 3 to 1? Maybe not. And actually, you can have a huge influence on that. You know, if you go in and actually kind of say, oh, you know, what did you do, and how's this or how's that, actually making the conversation happen. But what this research showed was those organisations with a ratio of 3 to 1 were more, incredibly more likely to succeed. You don't want a ratio of 20 to 1. You know, you don't want to kind of like have your sit backs handy. You know, it's kind of like it's got to be genuine. You're not kind of thinking of artificial things, but it's just having it happen. And in fact, the ratio, Barbara Friedrichsen did some work with couples who were getting married, and she sat and watched those, and they could predict whether they were going to stay together or get divorced. And the ratio at home is 5 to 1. So just let you know that so you can compare. A lot of the work Martin Seligman did himself was around post-traumatic stress. And post-traumatic stress is something that can affect soldiers, but it also affects anybody in a kind of difficult, challenging profession like we were. For the army, the cost of post-traumatic stress is huge, absolutely huge. And so he went to the army and said, we've got some techniques that we think will help you prevent post-traumatic stress. Thinking the army would say, will you pilot them? And the US Army, which is pretty big, said, yeah, okay, go and deliver them. And Martin Seligman said, well, actually, do you not want us to kind of try it out first? He said, no, you're a researcher, we're the army, go and do it. And so they've done a huge piece of work with the army, looking at how you improve the figure so that people don't get post-traumatic stress. In actual fact, you kind of get a feeling that if anybody goes to a war zone, they're going to come back with post-traumatic stress. But it doesn't work like that. And the work that he's done, and the work that Dennis Charney's done, looks at the fact that certain personalities are actually more protected from post-traumatic stress. And some of the work he does is around signature strengths. And that's a questionnaire that you can do on his website, which tells you about kind of what kind of things you enjoy doing and where your own strengths are. And actually understanding that can help make you see what you enjoy doing. And if you understand what you enjoy doing, and for me, my signature strengths are around leadership, they're around new things, and they're around gratitude. And actually what I love is doing new things, coming up with new ideas, working with other people, developing others. That's what I love doing. And what he says is that once you understand what your signature strengths are, you can actually adapt the way you work to allow for them. So as I say, they did a lot of work with the army, looking at how you support, how we give feedback, which was really influential. And one of the things he did, which he said was one of the most important things in terms of your resilience and your own mood, was something called the 3 good things exercise. And he says that if you do this every night for a week or a couple of weeks, you will feel better at the end. So what he says you need to do is, at the end of every day, write down 3 good things that happened that day, and say, why did it happen? What does it mean to you, and how do you have more of it? They've got some very powerful research on that. As a not very organised person, I don't write things down very often. I can't read my writing apart or anything else. I use a kind of adaptation of that, which is called Please, Thank You, Happy, which is parathyroid hormone, if you need to know what it is. And so when you get to bed at night, think, what am I most pleased about? What am I thankful for? And what am I happy about? And they're quite different, those things, really. And one of the things I like about Please, Thankful, Happy is that you can, they can apply if you've had a bad day. So we had a day a few months ago where we had a very aggressive patient came in and was verbally and almost physically aggressive to one of the members of staff. We had the police in. It wasn't a particularly pleasant experience. But actually what was really good was that the whole team pulled together. We've got an emergency system. People arrived. No harm was done. So actually, at the end of that day, even though I couldn't say it was a good thing that happened, I was actually pleased as to how well we'd worked as a team, really. I was thankful that nobody got hurt, and I was kind of happy to be part of a team that supports each other when stuff like that happens. So have a think about that. What just talk to the person next to you, and just say yesterday, what were you pleased, thankful, or happy about? Is actually understanding, I suppose, kind of from a sort of neurophysiology point of view, what happens. And there's a kind of balance between the sympathetic nervous system, which is driven very much by your amygdala in the chin, and your kind of parasympathetic nervous system, and your kind of vagal tone, which kind of counteracts it. And there's lots of different research going on about how the limbic system is evolved. Basically, the fundamental of this is that actually, if, as you're going to sleep at night, you actually think of something positive, the chances are you're going to calm down that kind of stress bit of your brain, and you're much more likely to sleep better. And I don't know if you've had an experience where you have a really kind of, something really difficult's happening, you have an unsettled night's sleep, and although you've been asleep, actually, you don't feel, you wake up having had a very busy night. One of the things that happens when you're asleep is, obviously the idea is that your brain goes to sleep, but the bit of your brain that tends to be awake in the night is the amygdala, is the chimp, putting out stress chemicals. And what you want to do is actually try and calm that down. And so, you know, you get that feeling when you wake up in the night, and you kind of, I mean, sometimes you kind of, it's partly type 2 thinking actually, but you think you've done your day's work, and you go to bed, and you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you think, oh my God, that patient didn't have such and such, she had something else really. Have you ever had that experience? It's just me really. But you know, you have that feeling. And what happens is, actually, your amygdala is the only bit of your brain that's awake in the night. And one of the things about your amygdala is it's very good at you know, waving a big red flag or flashing blue lights and telling you something's wrong. But it's actually not very good at solving problems. And actually, it kind of feels a bit like a hamster on a wheel going round. You get that sensation in the night. And actually, as soon as you get up in the morning and actually you wake up your frontal cortex, actually you think, you know, actually I think I was probably right, or even if I was wrong, I can sort it out, and you get into your functioning bit of brain. So what you want to do when you go to bed at night is actually is get your amygdala to be settled, and there's lots of different techniques, but this is one of them. It's quite a nice thing to do with children as well, but it's have a go with Please Thank You Happy. I know it maybe sounds a little banal, but from the research that they've done, it has been one of the huge influences. Just to give you an idea about evidence, there's a lot of evidence outside of medicine about how much resilience training makes a difference, really. And I've talked a bit about CBT and mindfulness. Have any of you done any mindfulness? Have you had a go at doing any mindfulness? Some of you have, I don't know if you liked it or not. Any people like the mindfulness that they've done? There's huge, you have somebody has, because there's a lot of evidence that makes a huge difference. And again, it's part of that, actually getting your brain to function well and looking at the way the brain works. And again, some other areas that we've talked about. One of the things I haven't really talked about, but it is also important, is actually organisational things and the environment that we work in. And actually, you know, we talked a bit about the Lasada ratio, and that's partly an organisational thing. But getting the organisation right does make a huge difference. And I think that's something that, you know, does require work. I mean, you probably recognise some organisations are better to work for others. I don't think it in any way means that we shouldn't develop our own resilience as individuals. But understanding that is important. And one of the things that there's quite a bit of work on is something called wicked problems. And I think this is quite a useful thing, again, in medicine, because wicked problems are ones that don't have an obvious solution. There isn't a kind of clear, obvious answer for them. And one of the things for us is that in medicine, a lot of problems are wicked problems. And if we don't get the right answer, actually it can be very kind of stressful on us. And I was thinking, today I've been dealing with a patient I've been seeing a lot over the last few months, had an angioma, which took a while to diagnose really, and I don't know that looking back on the steps we could have done anything different, but actually that kind of feeling that actually it is a difficult thing, and actually coping with that and understanding that what we're dealing with is difficult problems and that there aren't simple solutions. And sometimes the kind of, you can sort of, there's a feeling that I think people think that medicine is you know, there's a solution and a protocol and you just follow the protocol, but I guess when you work within a specialty you realise that's not the case. So just the understanding of the difficulties is important. And in terms of research and interventions, I'm going to talk a bit about a Canadian study which looks at what makes doctors resilient. But this concept of the kind of wobble board or the coping reservoir, really, that actually how you do that. And actually, you know, for each of you, you know, for me, I guess it's about exercise and yoga, which is the things that I love. And my garden, and the picture earlier was about, you know, was it my garden? It's something that really that gives me the resilience that actually fills my reservoir, really. And even when things are difficult, I maintain those things, really. So resilience training is helpful. I think it has to be a very kind of personal thing to you as to what works for you individually. There's some work that's been done in medicine, again, some things around mindfulness, life coaching, wellness programs that make a difference. And one of the things I recognise when you're working, you're moving around, it's actually quite difficult to do exercise classes, to do things, you know, to do the things that actually really stretch your brain and you enjoy. So I'm just going to touch on a kind of few books and things, other sort of resources that you may like. And this is Elaine Fox, who's working, around, she's actually, this piece of work she did, she was based in Oxford doing this, which is a book called Rainy Brain, Sunny Brain. And she's done a lot of the research around how the brain works, and also covers a lot of other people's research. But she has a concept of the kind of rainy brain, a lot of which is around the amygdala, and the sunny brain, which is the more positive side. But what the concept that she brings, which I really love, is the idea that if you develop a kind of pathway, a circuit in your brain, the sort of sunny brain, then actually things will flow down that. You almost, you know, like a kind of a valley flows. The more you use it, the stronger that pathway is. And she talks around about those pathways and how you develop the pathways. And it's a really interesting book. You can go on her website, you can test how optimistic or pessimistic you are. But again, what's interesting from her work is how you can learn to be more optimistic. This is an app that's available. This is some work that a guy called Alistair Dobbin has done, who's a GP in Edinburgh, and he started working, he does a lot of academic work, and he came across some work that was done with athletes, elite athletes, looking at what makes elite athletes, elite athletes resilient, because being an elite athlete is an incredibly stressful thing to do. And somebody came up with a series of tapes, a series of sort of audio recordings, which was around developing resilience in athletes, about helping them cope with the anxiety and helping improve them. And they showed that actually their mood improved, they all slept better. And what Alistair's done is he's developed these to use in general practice, and they've done them now with about 80 or 100,000 patients in Scotland. And what he originally developed was CDs that they gave out to patients. And there's a series of 12 tracks, and they're each 15 minutes each. And it starts off with some general relaxation, and then goes on into developing a positive mind space. So it's a mixture of mindfulness and positive thinking. They've used it extensively, and what they've shown with some fairly detailed research is that it's effective as antidepressants, and it's as effective as CBT. And it's massively cost effective compared to those two things, and that's how he's managed to get going in Scotland. I've done the training, so I've used this extensively. And what's come out in the last couple of weeks is an app. So you can download that app onto your phone. The first 3 tapes are free, and then you can actually pay, I think it's $11.99 to get the other tapes. And if any of you want to email me, I can give you a code to let you try them out. But they're an interesting approach as well. Again, you know, not everything suits everybody, but I found those really helpful, and they definitely seem to work with the sleep. And one of the things that he talks a bit about is breathing. And one of the things to say when you're under stress is, you know, take a deep breath. Well, actually, taking a deep breath in is probably not a good thing, because you all know about vagal tone and sinus rhythm. And when you take a deep breath in, actually your heart rate speeds up, doesn't it? And actually, it's the breathing out that helps you. So actually learning to breathe, and learning to breathe diaphragmatically. So if you breathe diaphragmatically, you stretch your diaphragm as you breathe out, actually you lower the vagal tone and your heart rate goes down. And I was talking about when I did the training, he said, you know, when I wake up in the night, that's the breathing I do, and it sends you back to sleep again. And it does actually, because it does actually lower your vagal tone, whereas when you get stressed and panicky, you're breathing appropriately. So again, all these things, they sound very basic, but they actually have got utility behind them. So I suppose just to kind of coming towards the end, chronic overload attacks even the most important, the most resilient person. That's a box of hotel chocolate, which is one of my favourite chocolates. But you know, I think medicine's a bit like chocolate. I really love it, but too much of it can make me ill, really. So you know, too much stress, it doesn't matter how resilient you are. So it's kind of how much can you do and coping with that. I'm just going to flick through those. And I'm just going to talk about a piece of research that was done in Canada with about an area of about 300 family doctors. And a group of researchers wanted to do some research into resilience, and what they decided to do was to find some resilient doctors, and they got people to nominate doctors who were resilient, and they interviewed them, and these were the 4 themes that they found that were sort of common to the resilient doctors. And the doctors they picked were a mix of male, female, young, old, part-time, full-time, and there were 4 things. One of them was about their attitudes and perspectives. That actually they remembered why it was that they wanted to be a doctor, and actually how amazing the job was. and they kept a kind of self-awareness about that. And they often said it was really helpful to develop new things within your work. I mean, we wouldn't have got this far as doctors if you didn't have brains that work really well. And that ability to learn new things is one of the things that can inspire you. And I think the other thing they said was about accepting your limitations. You know, we can't get it right all the time. It's not that kind of job, really. He talked about balance and prioritisation. You know, people talk about work-life balance, but actually being realistic. I mean, for me, as it, you know, I always, you know, amuses isn't quite the right word, but you know, GPs, we have to know, you know, so much stuff, and we get 3 years training. I mean, it's just totally bonkers, really. But actually, you can be entirely overwhelmed, I'm sure you can in any specialty, by the amount that you have to learn. So you have to be realistic about how much time you've got to learn that, and you know, not be over ambitious about what you can do, really. So actually being realistic and valuing yourself and setting limits to what you do. That your work environment is important, and actually working with good staff, having good systems in place makes a huge difference. And that systems that don't work kind of eat away at you a bit, really, so getting those right. And they talked about supportive relationships and you know, having positive personal relations, having you know, professional relationships and good communication is really important. And you know, I was talking about the kind of connections with other people, that actually we do kind of, you have people you can really talk to about what it feels is important. What I'd like you to do is, on your tables there should be a sheet with 4 areas, with those kind of 4 areas on. And what I want you to do is to have a look at each of those 4 areas and say, for each of you, what do you do well within that area, and what could you do that would make it better? So just have a go yourself at just filling that out. What do you do well within each of those 4 areas, and what could you do maybe to improve it, so that you can come up with some ways to think about being more resilient. So I'm going to leave you to do that for a couple of minutes, and then you may want to discuss it with the person next to you. To get at least one thing in each of the boxes, 1 or 2 things in each of the boxes that you do well, and then 1 thing that you would like to do, maybe do differently. And when you've done that, if you're struggling, then again talk to the person next to you, maybe 2s or 3s, just about kind of what other people, how you kind of rate what other people have got there. Background behind this work around the changes that enable us to be resilient, and that we can learn to be more resilient. And one of the things that Martin Seligman says is that the people that work in this field, some of the sort of top psychologists, are some of the happiest people around. And I've kind of been involved in this work for a while, but over the last 2 or 3 years I've done a lot more work around it, and it has had a huge impact on me, really. And I guess if one thing I hope is that if you actually get to a stage where you are under a lot of stress and stuff's happening, you'll actually remember that spiral and actually think, what can I do really? What can I do that will make a difference? And if you want to read more about it and more about the scientific background or the background to it, there's a sort of collection of books, and I'm not suggesting you read all of those. I appreciate I'm a kind of a manic book reader, but maybe pick one. So Flourish is Martin Seligman's work, and again, he's on YouTube doing it, talking about his work. And Daniel Offrey's written a book called What Doctors Feel, and that's about the stress of being a doctor and some of the things that help. It's a very American book. Again, I listened to that on audiobook, but also interesting. Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, isn't specifically about medicine or doctors. It talks a lot about other stuff about how we think. It's a very interesting book. And Barbara Friedrichsen's book, Positivity, is her research around actually how to learn to be more positive, around some of the Lasada ratio, and actually mindfulness and lots of different techniques. 7 Habits I talked about before, T, really helpful book. Elaine Fox's Rainy Brain, Sunny Brain, and we're going to hopefully have Elaine Fox come and speak at the Leadership Conference next year. Time to Think, another interesting book about actually how we give ourselves time to think, how we think problems through that can help, and the Chimp Paradox. So a kind of collection of things. I hope it's something for everybody, and I hope really you maybe go away from today with something that you may do, or maybe a recognition of actually how resilient you are really, and actually a remembrance of kind of what an amazing job we do. So thank you very much. And if anybody wants any resources or information on the app, my email's on the I'm on the Health Education Northwest website. It's on the handout with the presentations. You're welcome to email me if you wanted any of the materials. So thank you very much.